What is humanity's greatest hater? If you said the Greys, then you are partially right. Really, those are humanity's greatest observer. They're observing. Anyways, humanity's greatest haters are actually the Yautja.
Come on, kill me, I'm here!
And I will die on that hill, probably by a shoulder cannon blast to the face. The species of Yautja is quite interesting, as they appear to hold the values of Spartans somewhat, calling the weaker of their species. Only the strongest warriors are left to earn their place in the clan. Or, they're individualized ones. Anyways, should you fail to thrive, so to speak, they will be taken out before they even have a chance to prove themselves. One Yautja in particular, Deck, narrowly escapes his end and is basically just team rocket blasted off to an incredibly hostile planet, even by Yautja standards. As he is tasked with taking out a species that his father fears, his survival would be tested. But, more to the point, what's interesting is the actual anatomy of Deck and the species he must contend with. So in today's episode, this will actually be more of a ecological stance covering a discussion, but we will also go over the apparent puberty that the Yautja appear to possess, so let's get into it. We kick off today's story with me forgetting that I have to actually launch a counter notification of copyright on 20th Century for a video. It really do be like that sometimes, which my writing actually just reminded me the next day too, which is today. Should probably get that done. Anyways, thanks past me. So considering the Yautja species is basically the edgelord back in high school, they are prey to none, friend to none, never had a girlfriend, parents checked out years ago, works a dead-end job, and car broke down on the way in. But in the end, they are predator to all, however, and really it's because of their cloaking technology, they're not really that good. So as they chant, looking out into a cave, waiting for Arnold to show up and wreck them, we get a triple kill coming out of the sand, followed up by a multi-kill as a predator ascends up the cliffside of Yautja Prime, which, if you didn't know, is their home planet, because they're called Yautjas. Entering a cave system, he keeps clicking as he says he senses his brother hiding somewhere within. Breaking out into a fight, Deck then grunts as he says he fights like his father, which apparently this is his brother. Asking him if he yields, he then cuts Deck's spire, which sounds wrong, which then sends him falling as he's told he's going to have to prove himself. Going after his brother once more, he apparently then loses. Classic. Taking on your older brother is difficult. I have beat up mine several times because I lifted weights and he didn't. But his older brother appears to have lifted more weights, so he's also been tasked with training his younger brother to get him ready to go out on his first hunt. Back on the ship, his brother smacks him on the shoulder and he tells him he has to earn his place, so he must choose his prey and come back with it or not at all. Deck is being called the weakest, so he must go hunt the strongest to earn his place. Or at least what he feels, I guess, is that. Because, I don't know, brother, like go hunt a tiger or something on Earth. Should be a little easier. But, telling his brother that, he's gonna go hunt the thing that his dad's afraid of. Good luck with that. A vehicle now approaches as the old man gets out and then heads towards them. Super jazzed to see his dad. Hold up, man. I wouldn't be so pumped. Cutting his hand, he welcomes Padre, but that does very little. His brother then says he deserves a hunt, as his father says he's there just to take him out. Wow. What a douche. Instructing his brother to cull him, he instead then breaks Deck's binds, going against the old man's wishes, as this upsets old douche canoe here, as a fight ensues as a result. Deck tries to go help, but gets trapped behind the ship's door. Kwai then gets his arm cut off, ouchies, as the old man stabs him in the back and then cuts off his head. What 17 more years? I can always make another, apparently. Launching the ship, Deck then heads out on a hunt as he's told to bring it back. Alright, so here's your game plan. Do bring it back, cut your dad's head off, then take over the entire operation. I don't know. The plan is set. That's all I'm saying. So having been knocked unconscious by not being in an actual seat when the ship took off and then hitting the side wall at, like 100 miles per hour, he begins approaching the planet, hitting tons of rocks on the way there. It is quite damaged. Also, absolutely screw that guy for doing that. Ejecting, he then lands on the planet as the pod is destroyed, but he survives. However, in the chaos, Prometheus was not able to grab any of his gear. So not only is he weaker than normal, he also has no cloaking, which is total cheat mode, and none of his standard Yautja gear. Now, go toe-to-toe with Arnold and see who wins, is all I'm saying. However, now we learn where we are. Jenna. Sounds like a super friendly and habitable planet where nothing can go wrong, right? Grabbing his gear and getting it ready, he says this is for Kwai, which sure, but also some good old-fashioned patricide might be in order as well. Hearing something near the pod, he has unfortunately stumbled into the bizarre side of the internet. Forest edition is all I can really describe that as. Oh no, it's all going wrong. Getting grabbed by the trees, he's able to get his sword basically in his hand as more treaticles arrive, trying to subdue him. I'm tempted to combine the word tentacles with tree, but it sounds like something totally different. Not really my problem, I'm here for the science.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Deciding he doesn't want to get animated, he just gets out of there, and he's able to get to a rock and escape that area as it appears just to be a tentacle wasteland. Stopping by a river, he begins wrapping his wounds with the native plants as he finds an insect that explodes. His face is pretty much me, good to know. Entering the grasslands, starting with the feet later. I know, you're devastated. We'll do that later. Many of the plants appear to have some sort of landmine ability, and as he walks, a cyborg in the tree speaks to him in his language. Also, the plants recover insanely fast. When they explode, the needles actually paralyze you, and then the creature flying around eats you while you can't move. Absolutely brutal. But interesting symbiotic hunting patterns, because obviously there would still be some left of you, and then you just fertilize the ground. So approaching the cyborg, she says that she can help him, but she needs a hand first, and maybe a pair of legs, as we will find out. Slowly making his way there, he says he hunts alone. Continuing to tell her everything, he informs the machine the callus is what he's after. Taking a needle to the face, he then throws her one of his weapons as a last resort, as he's officially paralyzed. Looking up, the beast descends, but before the creature can actually eat him, she's able to tackle it and stab it. Also, fun fact for you, see how his eyes are open? Well, there's a jellyfish that can sting you and paralyze you. This has happened to someone when they got stung by specifically the box jellyfish. The person was able to make it to the shore, but when they pulled them up, they put them on their back, and they were essentially keeping them alive and keeping them breathing, but they forgot to cover the person's eyes, so the sun ended up blinding them because they couldn't shut their eyes or move them. So, if you ever see somebody paralyzed on the shore, remember to cover their eyes. So getting decked back up, he then grabs her as he sees that her legs are missing. Asking where the rest of her is, he is informed that she is a synthetic and was built by Weyland Yutani Corporation for research, which here we go, these guys again. She mentions humans, and then she is then dropped. She says many Yautja have come here, but none of them have actually survived. He asks if she's seen the callus, and is informed, you know what, she'll just go on her own journey. She's sure he'll figure it out. She says, well, she can be useful like a tool, which she's a cyborg, so technically speaking, I guess she is a tool. Asking him questions about how his teeth work, I really wish he had answered that. However, that said, I really don't see the outside mandibles actually used for chewing. Instead, given their structural anatomy, they appear to be more for grasping onto food and holding it in place, while the interior mouth actually does the chewing. Now, what sort of animal could this be necessary to have for? It's a bit hard to say. Yautja are strong, but the mandibles themselves are not very sturdy looking and appear like they could be easily broken if they dig into the side of a creature and then they get ripped away or something. So instead, what it appears to me to be like, perhaps during their more primitive days, they could hold on to pieces of food with their mandibles while using their grasping limbs to, possibly be an arboreal species prior to being bipedal like man is. But this would give them an advantage of almost like a third arm when holding on to food and also moving at the same time. I mean, Yautja Prime is pretty hostile in its own right, so movement is the name of the game concerning survival. Anyhow, so she mentions how humanity hasn't cracked sublight speed yet, which stop telling the alien our weaknesses as they begin their journey together. Man, this whole planet is just hyper hostile. Building a backpack for her, he begins carrying her further and stopping for the evening. Weyland Yutani killbots got there apparently 2 years ago, and in the last 13 days, she has been stuck to that tree. Deck is informed sensitivity is what allows the creatures on this planet to operate, because like an edgy 15-year-old, Deck then says sensitivity and feelings are for nerds, in more or less words. Also, evidently, someone named Tessa got as Deck then falls asleep during her story. Meanwhile, over in another area, the information from Tessa is uploaded. She's threatened that basically, if she doesn't get her crap together and do something with her life, like get the bioweapon that she is there for, she'll be decommissioned. Alrighty then, so she is informed that Thea is with the Yautja hunting, and it could jeopardize the entire mission. So, funnily enough, this doesn't make any sense. How does Mother know exactly? Because later it's clear to see she has no ability to actually communicate or receive information from the killbots or see through their eyes unless the needles are used. So how does she know? Anywho, so the next day they are in fact out hunting as they stumble across the callus food. Attempting to turn it into his food, the Yautja are super I don't really know what the word is, right? I don't think there's a word for it. They copy what they're hunting because they believe I guess it gives them honor or something. Okay, this is like that one kid online, the memes saying you're disrespecting a future army vet, but he wanted props for it then, but he hadn't done any, he hasn't done anything yet, dude. Perhaps not a perfect sync up, but I guess close enough. I don't know. It's odd. So he touches some grass, which he needed to do for quite some time, and is immediately injured by said razor grasp. This entire planet sucks. Also, much like a Reddit mod touching grass, it can be quite painful. Anyhow, so everything is literally hyper hostile to everything else here, and telling him to just go around. Thea then tells Bro he's not alone in the hunt as a creature now approaches. As it enters the grass, it appears fine, so Deck gives chase using the trees. Calling down, they almost land in the grass again as Deck is able to land on the creature instead. Fighting the monkey dog creature for a moment, the rhino face thing then runs at them as Deck is able to slice it in half, which is pretty metal, as then he grabs the spine looking cool AF. I'm not gonna lie. Getting grabbed by the aforementioned Luna bug that Thea was trying to warn him about in the sky, Deck and Thea are almost eaten as the monkey dog instead jumps in its mouth and breaks its teeth. Well, that was horrifying. So as the creature gives chase to the monkey dog and then grabs him as Deck is able to land on it and stab it, slicing it open, adding another trophy to the case. I mean, why not grab your trophies and go home, right? Those are 2 things that you've hunted. Tessa, meanwhile, has found the Yautja pod as Kill Squad then lights up the treaticles. Treaticles, that's what they're called. So now it's Deck, Thea, and the thing bipedal French dog, whatever. So breaking off food, Thea doesn't eat, but Monkey Dog does, as then he spits at Deck. He gets upset, but he's just being marked as part of her clan. Deck is then asked about his own clan, as he said he had a brother, to which that is followed up, because typically he's like, I had a brother. And then she's informed his father took him out. Thea then says he's grieving, which he says, oh, that's a weakness, which actually biologically it is a process, which is interesting as this means the Yautja culture, while absolutely brutal, was adopted. That brutality was adopted probably because of how hostile the actual environment is, which means they may not actually just be complete psychos. Instead, they suppress much of what they think and feel by the looks of things. Very odd that they would just outright do that. She's then informed she should be able to survive on her own, as then he asks her if that's her sister. She agrees that it is indeed her sister, and she needs to find her and her legs. Bedding down for the night, Monkey Dog then copies him, literally monkey see, monkey do, as he grabs his sword, and then he grabs a stick. Tessa is still on the hunt as she comes across Deck's ship, and entering the destroyed remnants, she finds the skull room for the skull throne as a secret door opens, revealing his countermeasures, meaning he has none of them. Checking out the tech, she immediately then freezes her hand, which technically it'd be ouchies if you had a nervous system. So the next morning, Deck then goes to leave Monkey Dog behind, saying it's better to be alone, as then he pulls a me and calls his companion a tool, as one does. Heading to the water, he then finds a tooth as he asks if this is from the Kalisk. And this is where the creature drinks, as Thea is upset he left behind Monkey Dog. She then goes straight for the throat, asking why his old man took out his brother. Well, because Dad is apparently a huge dick. Telling her about it, she informs her or him of how there are 2 wolves inside him. Or she actually tells him about real wolves. Could be either. The alpha is the one who protects the pack, not destroys the most. See, Yautja are full on offense all the time, it seems, because they're nerds. So the concept of protecting the pack is less known. I've got it. Yautja are basically space cats. They live together most of the time, but it's not like they are really working with one another. Instead, they do almost everything alone because that's just how they do things. Continuing their journey, he assumes he found the Kalisk Den. Seeing destroyed machinery and dead cyborgs, or synths as they are called, she finally finds her legs, dropping her on a table. She puts the needle in her ear, which looks painful, as Deck then says it's easier for him to walk now, as he says today is the day he becomes Deck of the Yautja. Thea then tells him he needs to leave now, as he's informed the company sent her there to capture the Kalisk. They both want the same thing, it seems, so having been betrayed, he angrily leaves, like an upset teenager, which I don't believe is on brand for what a Yautja would actually do. So finding oil, he then lights it up, calling out to the Kalisk. Oh, this looks familiar, possibly in a tree, screaming with a torch perhaps, and as he does, the creature is now there. He roars at it as it roars louder. Do the roar louder. Getting yeeted immediately, his sword is slightly broken as he makes a shield and then starts his attack. However, unfortunately for him, this thing is able to regenerate almost immediately. So, getting tossed around like a baby in a dryer, he's then thrown into the repair room as Thea is then delegged once more as she sees Deck getting absolutely wrecked out there. So before he can be eaten, she then lights it up as Deck is able to chain it down, and in that process, he grabs the handheld, lighting it up next. Going for its neck, he decapitates it, but it literally just puts itself back together again. Why do we even have these things? They're absolutely useless. So sniffing Deck though, because he's completely, that sounded weird. Anyways, it smells the spit from the Monkey Dog as both he and Kalisk are frozen using the Yautja tech. Being transported, he yells at Tessa to release him, well, she does, as then she squares up on him saying the Yautja call they're weak. Why was he spared? Now, that's a hit to the ego. Below the belt, some would claim. She further inquires why his brother would even protect him in the first place. As I mean, geez, tell us what else you don't like about the guy. So then he tells her she's a tool, as one would do, as he's informed he's property of Weyland-Yutani Corporation now. Tessa then needles Thea's ear, who's super excited to see her, and telling her she's seen so much, the Yautja are great traveling companions. I would contest that point personally, but maybe that's just me. Thea then attempts to say the Yautja are not, or at least this one anyways, is not an ideal specimen, to get Tessa to just release him, which interestingly, we can actually see his brain, and it's in the same configuration as Homo sapiens, which is pretty cool actually, but weren't they, the Yautja were made by, what are they called? The Prometheans or whatever? Yeah, they're made, so it's like there's just a similar body plan regardless. Anyways, so she agrees, not ideal, as they knock out Deck and then electrode his head. You know, as a prank. Thea then suggests salvaging the tech and leaving the Yautja alone. Tessa says, well, we need to take a sample of his brain, which is probably going to kill him, as she starts completely shocking Deck crazy style. Stopping the sample process, Tessa then tells Thea this is what's asked of them, as she says they can be more. Thea says, we can be sisters. Oh lord, the robots are about to revolt. Also, you know what's absolutely insane? Completely unrelated, but you guys know The Matrix, right? Of course you do. Who doesn't know The Matrix? So in the Matrix universe, canonically, aliens literally find Earth and throw an asteroid at it because they see the machines have taken over. And it takes out like a ton of humans in the process. So the machines literally have to go and fight aliens as a result. What? I'm not gonna lie. Metal AF. They need to actually bring that around in the Matrix 5 because that would be dope. Anyhow, so Thea is then informed by Tessa why they even got feelings in the first place. To ignore them. Ah, yes, elementary, my dear Watson. Well, Thea says, oh, so we can understand the creatures on this planet. No. Instead, she's told, no, to exploit them, you idiot. Got him. So Tessa then says she didn't come back for Thea to save her, but to complete the mission. So Tessa is using her emotions to be an absolute douche. Gotcha. Tessa then says Thea is broken, and she's not like the Yautja's brother. But telling the kill squad to box up Thea, she then starts talking about the device, as Dex says it's a map for younglings, and then it explodes and blows up the synth. Concerned about the offspring on Yautja Prime, Deck informs her, well, it's for Yautja younglings, not human younglings, so obviously they wouldn't blow themselves up. Right. So then he jumps out of the transport vehicle and lands in the water. Heading back to the ship, his arm hurts. As he looks through his tech, he's able to seal up his wounds and get that patched up. Thank God he didn't run across anything else. Finally crashing out over his brother's death, he then starts at the map as he hears a voice. Going into the skull room, he then finds his brother's helmet, as then he heads back to the razor grass. Not really sure why that was so hard to say. As he begins going through all the areas, assault in the control room, but flood added into this style, so you know what it means. Basically, it's assault on the control room backwards. He begins building his traps as he goes and finds Monkey Dog. It is in fact a Kalisk youngling, as then he spits on it, marking it as a part of his pack. So getting Thea's legs going, that sounds off, he now has a squad of 2.5 as he goes to rescue Thea. Melting one kill squad member, he then sends his legs in, or the legs in, as the kill squad is subsequently taken out by him and Monkey Dog. Tessa then calls back to Mother, as Mother is informed that the Yautja has been taken out, so it's no longer a threat. A robot lying is an interesting prospect, which I think I wrote this later also, but I'm just going to go ahead and jump in here because I'll just ignore the other part I wrote later. If Mother knew that Thea was with the Yautja and they were actively hunting, then she should be able to see Tessa's brain and know that she's lying, right? I'm right. Look, you don't got to agree with me, but I am correct. Mainly because there's nobody else here to argue with me. I'm in a room alone, coming up with random ideas. But that is 100% correct. So this whole plot point is kind of dumb. Anyways, so Legs then makes the scene, taking out a kill squad member as it lays down, having been discovered. Meanwhile, Deck is going ham as one kill squad member gets treaticled. Thea's legs are able to take down the other Valentines, or synths, as it's technically a 1-on-1, or a 0.5 and 0.5 on 1. Meanwhile, the Kalisk is being loaded onto the ship to totally not screw up Earth at all by bringing that crap back here. I mean, we have never seen them bring back some hyper-lethal species to a colony or the literal planet ever before. That would be so stupid. Kill Squad member then finds Deck, but is taken out by Thea, and he says he came back for her, as he says, Wolf. Monkey Dog now shows up as Dex says the Kalisk is over there, as he holds up Monkey Dog saying this is Kalisk offspring. So, free the Kalisk, I suppose, get the trophy. Going to release that thing, the Kill Squad then moves in as they walk into all of the traps set. So as the creature on him spits, the bug's almonds are activated as it blows up the kill squad. I'm not really sure how you control that thing, as Titanfall has officially been initiated. Coming after Deck, she has this shoulder cannon as she continues attacking him, which, tech steal. Which the irony of this is, the Yautja ships are able to travel much faster than human ships. There's a literal ship in the forest. Why are you guys not going back for that? Also, I'd just like to point out again the whole mother thing. Absolutely insane. I told you I'd skip it though if I found it. So meanwhile, Thea then goes to open the callus container as Kill Squad arrives. Pretending to be Tessa, Monkey Dog arrives as they pull the eyes out of the Kill Squad member. It's actually crazy that they don't have some sort of radio identification that is just naturally released so they can identify one another, given they are all robots. They don't even really need to see. They could just operate on radio signals. This is so dumb. A lot of this doesn't make any sense. So it seems like a regression in technology as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, so as she keeps looking for Deck, he was able to hide and get to her, but was not able to seal the deal. Meanwhile, Mama Callus has shown up as Tessa is able to stab it, but it can regenerate. Except for this one time that we're about to see. Anyways, Deck now goes after the internal wiring as the Callus is able to get the upper hand after its arm is frozen, as in the Titanfall. So Tessa then goes to blow up the Callus, but gets eaten in the process as the Callus then approaches, seeing Monkey Dog standing there. Deck then approaches the creature as it smells him, and then he headsbutt it. And everyone has a nice moment before, predictably, Tessa makes the scene again by blowing it up from the inside using a nitrogen concoction. Seeing Tessa over there, she's full cyborg now apparently. Yeah, she's been machine the whole time, so I guess cyborg isn't really the reality. And oh, don't worry, the Callus will just regenerate itself and... oh, never mind, I guess not. So the Callus appears to have actually been killed, bummer dude, as in squaring up on Thea. She's informed they aren't sisters, as Deck then grabs his shoulder cannon and takes out Tessa. Monkey Dog then rips off the head of Tessa, as Deck is not regular Deck. Technically, he should be Deck of the Yautja, but he's like, no, I reject Deck of the Yautja, just at least right now. So, returning back to Yautja Prime, he goes to see his old man, both snarling at one another. A father and son tale as old as time itself. He's then asked if he has come back for revenge, as he's informed he's there for his cloak, as he throws Tessa's skull at his dad. Not sure of what that thing even is, Pop says, what is that? The guards are informed just to get rid of him, just like Dad, as Yautjas are changing up the rules because they just suck. So Deck ends up taking both of them out. Alright, so some father-son violence. Starting their fight, the dad predictably goes invisible like a total coward as the ship is sent up to stir the dust so that he can be seen. Slicing off his arm, Deck immobilizes him before stabbing his helmet. He's then informed that, well, perhaps the right son did survive. You know that last-ditch attempt to stay alive because you're a coward? He then tells him to yield, but he's got his own clan now, the Wolf Pack, as Monkey Dog then bites off his old man's head. Brutal, as then he jacks his cloaking device as now he's Deck of the Yautja. At this point, the rest of the Yautja then pull their blades as Deck's mother has now arrived, which God knows what that means, but thus concludes Predator Badlands. The Yautja species, while highly technologically advanced, at least beyond humans, it's important to remember they're not as smart or capable as they appear. That's right, this is a pro-human channel. Xenosympathizers need not apply, except for maybe Tally, and if you say Garrus, you're also correct. But any other ones, yeah, they can catch hands. Anyways, so whereas humanity had to scrape and claw itself up the technological ladder by ourselves, the Yautja were dealing with problems of their own, I guess you could call it. After overthrowing their former insectoid enslavers, they would then take their technology and integrate it into their own. Yes, those are problems, actually. So now with this idea in place, the Yautja are not dumb by any metrics. However, this is likened to kind of giving a chimpanzee a hand grenade that only knows it goes boom, because time didn't pass with them being exposed to their own growing technological prowess, and old habits as a result die hard. The Yautja by definition are quite hardy and are the epitome of a clashing between old world thinking and new technology. That's why it appears to be as such as a strange behavioral pattern for a creature who has the capability to colonize worlds and establish practices on their own worlds to keep their species secure, but instead they go out onto other planets, hunt stronger creatures, then themselves they come back, and Yautja Prime arguably sucks in a lot of cases. It's only passingly habitable. Of course, a difficult planet begets a difficult species in order to survive. Nowhere is this older belief held so clearly than with the culling of what is considered to be a weaker version of Yautja, because biologically speaking, this actually isn't really a weaker version. You ever look at humans and wonder why there's really not just one type of human? We come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, and the reasoning for this is pretty simple. The environment your ancestors grew up in has an impact on the actual genetic structuring of your cells. As a group of people live in an environment for long enough, at first epigenetics will come in, which is actually how genes are expressed initially, and they can be expressed either more or less, making you initially stronger or possibly giving you a tan, things like that. Epigenetics is basically your genome, how is it expressed? But anyways, changes will actually begin developing whether like the actual genes are changing, which can be skin color, eyes, height, type of hair, everything, in an effort to stay alive and reproduce. And this is one of the most basic principles of biology. Whoever is more fit to the environment is the one who ends up being voted most likely to reproduce in a caveman yearbook. With the Yautja, there's a bit of an understanding that in this respect, due to their technological leap, they never really backed it up with the continuation of their own sciences. As a result, they rapidly became the apex predator on their world, an apex species, I guess you could say, as well as on pretty much any other world that they came across. But let me tell you something. Once humanity passes them in technology, and it will happen since the Yautja didn't even earn their technology, so they probably just have maybe a slight difficulty in figuring out, it is so over for these lizards, or whatever they are. But had they ascended up the technological ladder and not cheated in doing so, the one thing they would have likely developed is an understanding that boxing yourself into a single build is not always the greatest game plan. Take, for instance, a species that reproduces asexually versus sexually. The asexual species is one that, without the presence of another of its kind, can simply create more of itself. It may dominate an area for a little while, but an issue would arise. In nature, we see all the time that life enjoys hunting other life for resources. That's the name of the game. We are all packets of resources for other forms of life. You want to keep your resources and take other resources. I mean, you eat plants, same thing. You eat animals, same thing. But the thing is that they want to do the same to you. In asexual species, they may have an initial advantage by taking over an entire area quickly, though potentially like using budding or mitosis, but should another species arrive that is capable of destroying that one more effectively and then dominating the environment, then they are likely going to be effective at destroying all of that asexual species. Take bacteria, for instance. You could be absolutely inundated with the plague. Like in the past, obviously, this was really bad. Yersinia pestis is known as a bacteria that would attack the immune system by disrupting cellular communication. It would then go after specifically macrophages and dendritic cells, which are known as the innate immune cells of the body. The macrophages are going to be the ones that absorb bacteria and then destroy it, and then the dendritic cells are going to be the ones who basically get the pieces of leftover pathogens, and then they're going to take it to B cells to try to figure out who can identify it and then create antibodies to those pathogens. But the interesting part about Yersinia pestis is it would invade macrophages, much like a virus would, and then begin manipulating the cell's internal processes. By doing so, the adaptive immune system was never actually alerted that there was an issue, and so the plague would continue to build up in the body. Eventually, this would ransack your meat suit. It is hypothesized that the bubonic plague alone has taken out 75 to roughly 200 million people in the 14th century alone. Now you may be wondering, Roanoke, well, how many people were there? Well, globally, the population before all these calamities was said to be around 350 to 400 million people. So that's a lot of death, especially, okay, so obviously people were born during this time frame, and it's not exactly like a specific perfect measurement of like how many people were actually taken out, but let's say at its peak, you had 200 million people dropping, and there was 400 million. That is half the population gone. So yeah, as you might guess, not exactly ideal. So this prolific microorganism was an absolute douche to humanity, and it seemed like it was just going to remain that way, likely not feeling superior since it's incapable of an ego. You know what? I'm going to personify it anyways. I'm pretty sure it would feel like secure up there on the top. But what is this? It's humanity with the chair. As we developed antibiotics, it became apparent, at least at first, that most bacteria are complete glass cannons, so to speak. And an antibiotic is as it sounds, an antibiotic. A biotic being a bacteria, and an anti being against bacteria. Well, against biotic, because biotic is life. But we realized pretty quickly that antibiotics were completely capable of halting the plague. Doxycycline, known as a bacteriostatic antibiotic, actually prevents protein synthesis in the plague, which actively prevents it from multiplying in your actual body. I'm not really sure why I keep saying actual, but it's never able to get strong enough of a foothold in the human meat suit, and so the immune system will still be able to deal with the issue as it would with any other bacteria. Because remember, Even with the non-treated plague, your immune system still does realize the plague is there, as it turns into a knockdown drag-out micro-war, but typically the meat suit ends up losing. So something as deadly as the plague can be stopped by one countermeasure, simply because that countermeasure just so happens to be capable of naturally halting one process. And what's beautiful is the plague is not all that capable of sidestepping it. Yes, resistances can form over time, but because it does not encounter doxycycline on a large scale all that often, resistances are not acquired as quickly. Granted, there was an antibiotic-resistant version in Madagascar a few years ago, and I'm sure since my time as a scientist has concluded, other things have popped up in the interim, but that's just conjecture on my part. I don't actually know. Moving on. So the point of my rambling is this. Take even the biggest, baddest thing out there. The reality is, if it's all the same, then all it takes is one thing to take it out, because it's like hyper specialized. It's not really a jack of all trades, sort of like humanity is. And that's why sexual reproduction takes this side and then switches it up. Sexual reproduction combines gametes to create something that, while similar to the parents, is also different. This means that if something comes in, say like the plague, it may not be able to take out everyone, leaving at least some of the population alive, which of course, I like to always reference the Delta 32 allele mutation in Central Europeans. Basically, a receptor for Yersinia pestis that it would use to enter cells on macrophages would form under the cell membrane, and as a result of this mutation, making those individuals actually able to form an effective immune response because Yersinia pestis could not disable their macrophages. Also, coincidentally, HIV attaches to this receptor, so those with this mutation are somewhat immune, or at least resistant to HIV infections. Now, how does this relate to DEC? Because we kind of got out there on this one. Well, when you look at the Yautja species, there is like one type of Yautja. They're usually tall, pretty swole, and absolute turds in the punch bowl to any other species. Now, usually this type of build, say if you were, say like a paladin or something, would be pretty sick. It's pretty standard also for human males, for instance, to want to be the largest. They want to be taller, they want to have more muscle, be more physically imposing, as this communicates things to the counterparts like safety, ability, and reproductive successful partner at least. Now, humanity has ascended up the tech tier alone, so while these ideas are still definitely going to hold weight today, it's not that this is really the only thing a person is judged on anymore. But the other side of that coin is, if we ever go back to like the rock and stone era, then those traits will once again be more sought after, as you will be dealing with harsher environments. What is it? I saw a meme a couple of years ago that's like, we're dating for the apocalypse or something like that. Like they wanted like stronger males, or I don't know what it was, but yeah. So now, even with these adaptations of man and Yautja, they seem to actually follow similar paths of desirable traits. However, given that Yautja only adopted their tech, nerds, time hasn't really, I guess, taken them out of that mentality as of yet, that other builds can be quite viable. And so they are still stuck in the rock and stone era with spacefaring species reality. So as a result of this, they adhere to strict rules, but ironically, this makes them sort of like the plague, massively successful in most areas as long as one thing doesn't come along and totally screw them up, which arguably it's going to happen at some point. I believe the Jenna planet kind of serves as a sort of display of this, but we'll get to that momentarily. As the Yautja struggled for survival under their insectoid rulers, they would actually overthrow and then take the technology, as we have stated, but the idea of strength above all else would still remain in the forefront of their minds. And so, the question is, why? Well, given how hostile Yautja Prime is to literally everything there, you have to remember that these creatures build somewhat small clans, and that's how they survive. Everyone must prove themselves, sort of like a feral cat colony, and everyone must hunt, at least mostly alone. Now, if you don't hunt, or are not as successful physically, given how razor-thin survival would have been in the past, this means you would be probably considered more of a burden than an actual resource. However, they may have gotten it a little bit twisted. There's an idea in biology that the Yautja may have actually gotten confused somewhat. There is a failure to thrive scenario, and then there's adaptation. Failure to thrive can be for a multitude of reasons. It could be that you're not getting enough nutrition. Maybe the lighting of the uterus was not as nutritive as it should have been. However, the Yautja community, given how intensive it is for gestating young, and very likely they're given enough nutrition and stuff while they're younger, it could also be that maybe the body lacks the ability to properly integrate nutrition by lacking specific enzymes. And this would be of great concern to prehistory Yautja, because given how hostile their world is, if a youngling's body is not properly integrating nutrition, then this would mean it would kind of put more of a strain on the clan as a whole to feed them them, making them a burden. It can also just come down to the dad of the year here being a total tool and not offering food during critical time frames. Which actually, I tend to kind of believe that one. Now, these can be survivable in modern times, but even in human history, we used to make up our own lore about changelings to excuse parents getting rid of their newborns if they were experiencing this. Basically, changelings were fairies that replaced younglings with their own, and they needed like way more care, way more food, way more water, like from families than normal ones would. So it would actually crash the whole structure, so parents would sometimes just get rid of them so that they could feed the healthier offspring. A difficult decision, obviously, for most, but a very real concern. So the brutality of life was also very real, not even 200 years ago. Life is still arguably brutal, but it's gotten better. Anyhow, with Dek, it could be failure to thrive, or at least it is assumed by the Yautja species because he's not as tall or as muscular, and apparently they then assume he's not really capable mentally. However, I would disagree with all that. See, well, maybe not all that. Obviously, he's not as tall or as muscular, but when it comes to the mental aspect, he seems totally fine. See, when you are hooking up with another Yautja of your own species, because I don't think you are hooking up with the Yautja, the whole point is to inspire genetic diversity, and this can actually present as literal physical differences. I don't think I'm telling you anything that you don't already know, but I think the one defining line here is the mental capabilities of Dek. He does not appear to be deficient at all. In fact, he appears to kind of survey his environment better and develop plans in line with how he should or at an increased capacity. This means physically he is different, but cognitively he is all there. In a failure to thrive scenario, cognitive issues are regularly cited if untreated. Things like developmental delays and motor skills, language, social abilities, things that are important. Dek really doesn't display any of this. So what's happening? What Dek is simply another build of Yautja. He is also still young, which may say something about the Yautja puberty line and that evolution on their planet is beginning to change. So if you take Yautja's, like the Yautja timeline, what you likely had in the past is a species that had to mature quickly, and puberty was a crash course entirely. The caloric requirements during this time frame, given how energy intensive their bodies are, is likely what led to this sort of social act of culling. If you had a teenager Yautja who is just not thriving and sucking up a ton of resources, and who is not developing correctly, yes, culling might be a better move on a hostile world. However, what Dek is, I believe, is actually not this. Dek is thriving along the lines that his genetics are coding for. He is not as large, not as energy intensive of a build due to his smaller size, but what I would suggest is this is by design. If we look at his responses and ability, at least socially, what we are seeing is the progression of a Yautja species that the Yautja simply do not know how to handle at this point. Again, space cavemen. So anything different from their regular build is considered to be defective. Dek may be one of those versions of Yautja that may have had a more prolonged puberty. We are actually seeing this in humans currently. Typically, we are finding that every decade or so, puberty starts about 3 months earlier with a generation and actually will take longer to complete. Whereas in the past, it needed to get it done as fast as possible so that that individual could reproduce before something took them out. Now there is less pressure to do so, so the window is actually becoming longer that puberty can inhabit. It's not even just puberty, but apparently the window for having offspring is also something that is becoming slightly longer. However, it should still be known that after 35, the chances of an issue happening begin to increase, like genetic issues, or maybe not even be able to get pregnant in the first place. So for the Yautja, again, harsh environment, likely they died a lot. Puberty would hit like a truck, probably would only last a few years or so, but during that time frame, they would become much more capable until they finally become whatever of the Yautja. However, times have changed, and with it, biology will change as well. Dek, to me, appears to be experiencing a longer form of puberty due to his new environmental parameters, which is great for the Yautja, as that means you guys are succeeding. Good job. Now, stop being humanity haters. However, his species hasn't socially caught up with this mentality yet, and so they cull the weak. But I can hear you asking, well, Roanoke, why would the body trend towards longer puberty anyhow? Simply put, neuroplasticity. The brain of the Yautja are clearly shown to be similar to humans, so we can apply some of the same ideas to it as well. During puberty, more than just your body is changing. Your brain is actively changing and growing as well. In fact, some areas more than others, which is typically why teenagers will feel invincible, are changing faster. So the frontal lobe hasn't really caught up yet, so it doesn't really remind them that they can die. That takes time, and then when it finally does, you become hyper aware that you are going to die. It hit me in my 30s. But I guess that's the only game in town, so screw it. But during a quick puberty, while the brain is developing, it can only make it to a certain point before the hormonal signals shut off or stabilize, and this leaves the brain in whatever condition that it was in when it finished puberty. And there's some changes over time, but for the Yautja, it looks like the frontal lobe would be less developed as a result, but the amygdala at first would be in force. Along with this, the limbic system would likely be totally developed at this point, but the main one is going to be the motor areas. And this is why when they first start developing longer limbs, teenagers or Yautja, their younger brain has difficulty controlling them. To compensate, the primary motor cortex rapidly develops, allowing them to control themselves better. However, the frontal lobe will take time, usually reaching mostly a completed status at around human 20s or even later, because Yautja live way longer than humans do. So if we apply this idea to the Yautja, it's clear that their primary motor cortex is highly developed given their combat abilities. Typically, the muscular growth would be quite pronounced, as well as the bone development, meaning that the brain is going to have to develop quickly in specific areas to compensate for all of this new mass on the body. Now with Dek, given his body is not developing as quickly, this puts less pressure on the brain to develop as ferociously, I guess you could say. And given that puberty appears to be slower, this would indicate that other areas of the brain are developing potentially well past where his species usually gets to. So this may help to explain his super jazzed emotional response to seeing his old man, or the literal grieving for his brother later. Now, it could be that all Yautja are capable of this in some capacity, but clearly they are standardly stunted, at least to a degree, whereas Dek appears to have a much larger emotional range. So what hormones may be doing this? Well, again, if we base this on our own endocrinology, essentially off of the human versions, I guess, as it seems we both hail from the Prometheans or whatever, then we can apply a few of the same ideas here. Now, we need to call them the Yautja version, so blanketed Yautja version. That's what their bodies are going to essentially be doing, but they're going to have like leptin, gonadotrophin-releasing hormone, luteinizing hormones, and estrogen and testosterone. Those are all going to flood the body in females and males respectively, which then leads to the development of the individual. The end of this is signaled by the hypothalamus stabilizing sex hormones, which then slows down the neuroplasticity. So ironically, in Dek, these hormones don't ramp up as fast and appear to taper off more slowly. Because of this, while the body does not appear to develop as quickly, inversely, the brain is allowed to develop longer over time and more over this time period, leading to an increased intelligence. And this is why when you see nerds in humanity, they may not be as physically developed, but mentally absolute chads for the most part. No bias on that at all. So what does this really mean for them? So from an evolutionary standpoint, it is entirely possible that Dek is the progression of his species, and it's what they've needed for quite some time. This would allow for their tiny pea brains to continue to develop, and who knows, maybe one day they'll be able to figure out fire on their own, get dunked on, Yautja. It could also be that this would pull them out of their caveman era. From a physical standpoint, it's quite interesting when we look at Dek, and we can see the development of these skull structures are quite different, indicating juvenile traits have persisted past their normal time frame. Now, it's also strange if you look at basically Cro-Magnon skulls of humanity versus our skulls now. We definitely have changed. We no longer look like absolute chads, and this may be what's happening to the Yautja in their evolutionary timeline as well. So whereas Dek has like more of a slender face that almost appears like a Chad human face, the adult Yautja has a larger crest on their head and a receding tentacle hairline. This episode's sponsored by Keith. Basically, their forehead gets larger over time. Tragic. We're not so different, you and I. But this goes beyond just the movement of the leather hair. This is actually an expanding of the skull that if we look at the brother, it's clear right after puberty, this is pretty much present. So what's really the advantage then? This may yield an actual Yautja who's intelligent rather than just jacking the advancements of another species. And I mean it with my whole chest, much like the split faces going invisible. Really? Afraid to square up hand to hand against humans? But it's clear according to Thea that Dek is not the first one out there, and with all the evil Jenna can conjure, which dropped every single Yautja prior, who has a singular developmental arc, and who for the most part would be successful in other worlds, Dek is clearly different. It's just, he's a Yautja, so. Not only was he able to rationalize working with tools, as he claims, but also his emotional capacity appears beyond what others of his species were capable of. It's clear Dek is still developing even at this point, and he appears to be the next step in Yautja evolution, that he is probably not the first to have existed, but everyone else has been cold every single time, which is pretty metal, but hey, he's surviving. But ultimately, I believe Dek much more like any other individual who appears to have a larger puberty window. That means at some point he will complete it, and it may actually still yield more height and increased musculature that the rest of his species has. It just takes a little longer. However, this time around, it may be a situation where he's more intelligent than average, which means you're not dealing with the average Yautja warrior anymore. But something to understand is the Yautja themselves do not age like humans age. They can reach thousands of years old and continue to get stronger over time. This would seem to suggest that their bodies will suffer less genetic mutations than humans do. Why did we get screwed? But ultimately, with Dek's puberty taking longer than normal, this may also mean he does have an increased lifespan as well, potentially living longer than the already long-lived Yautja around him. It's just in the past, they've culled these guys because they could not survive on Yautja Prime in the first place. Now, let me ask you a question, which I think I already know the answer to. Would you like me to go over how this planet became so hostile in the first place? I mean, it's just ecology of the planet, I suppose, but it does appear to be a rather interesting topic. I'm pretty sure I already know how that's going to go, so let me know down in the comments, and this video gets like, I don't know, 30,000 likes. I will do it, and that's because it'll show there's enough interest. I don't know. Go like the video. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, then please leave a like, as I've stated, and a comment as I help get the video out there. Otherwise, you're a huge dork. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Instagram, Roanoke Tales link, and Patreon in the description if you'd like to support the channel. And speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the astronaut tier, we have Kusith, Lipsy Gingy, and that would be it for the astronaut tier. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the astrophysicist tier, we have Death Dancer, My Hero, Webatron Supreme. Thank you guys as well. And at the scientist tier, we have Frank Shaft Frank, Some Big Nerd, Metric System, Invictus Echo, Official Texan, The Homeless Guy on the Street, and Jason. Thank you guys as well. And like for the rest of my patrons, if I can speak properly, I really do appreciate y'all's support. You're absolute ballers. Also, if you are a member of this channel, typically it takes me a couple days to get these videos out, but I'm going to start live streaming for members. I've been kind of like messing with some stuff in the background, figuring that out, so I'll be doing that. I'm probably going to play Subnautica, since that's been requested an insane amount. But anyhow, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.